First story. Crazy entitled Father beat the SHT out of him because he threw up the casserole. Father forced him to eat in front of his friend, humiliating him. Now Op is recovering from surgery. Father demands he stay with him, not realizing father is at the top of the list not to contact. So, this is something that happened to me a long time ago and something I've debated putting in a place like this. But I've decided that people need to know how horrible my father is. This is something I've told close friends before, and this is the first but certainly not the only horrible event regarding my father. Do also note that this is the farthest back I can remember. Context. I am 28, turning 29 next month, and this took place when I was very little. Either 4 or 5 years old. It was in the summer just before my 5th or 6th birthday. At the time, my parents, younger brother who was a baby at the time, and I were living in a middle-of-nowhere town close to family members. Dad worked a job, and my mom was the stay-at-home wife, aka the typical family dynamic of the 90s beginning of 2000s. During this particular day, my mom was doing errands with my grandma, her mom, and brought my brother with her, so it was just my dad and me. A co-worker of his was camping at a nearby campground that we frequently visited when we lived there, and my dad decided to get the camper trailer and camp out that weekend. We get there and I'm invited to play with the other kids, including the 2 boys of the co-worker, who were either my age or a bit older than me. There was a nearby creek that was a popular swimming area for the kids in spite of the potential cottonmouth snake. But being in the southern USA, you're taught at a very young age to always keep an eye out for snakes. I bring this up because I loved to swim as a kid, and my dad strictly told me to not get close to the creek, because he didn't want me swimming just yet. There was a pool not far from the campground that I believe he was planning on taking me to until things went south. However, while I was playing with the kids, I ended up tripping on a rock and tumbling into said creek and getting completely drenched. I was, and still am, a great swimmer, and the creek wasn't really deep, so I wasn't in any danger, but I was afraid my dad would be mad. The co-workers' kids were willing to vouch for me that I fell in by accident. We went to my dad's trailer and sure enough he immediately got mad, yelling at me that I wasn't supposed to go swimming. Although this is the farthest I remember back, I know that even then I was scared of him when he was mad, and I ended up being quiet, as you couldn't say anything when he was mad without making the situation worse. The 2 boys fulfilled their promise to try and defend me, telling my dad it was an accident, only for my dad to tell them both to scram as he dragged me inside. I was tossed into the bathroom, as in literally thrown inside with a towel and some dry clothes and told to quickly change. I did so without saying a single word. Even after I did what was told, he was still fuming. We were going to the co-worker's trailer for lunch, and my dad threatened me, or as he would say, promised, as he said all his threats were promises, because he always intended to act out on his threats, that if I screw up one more time I'll regret it. At the co-worker's trailer, the lunch was some kind of casserole. Like many kids, I was and still am to some extent a picky eater, so I already decided I wasn't hungry. But it took one glare of pure anger from my dad to get me to start eating. Within a couple of bites I was getting nauseous and I put the fork down and said I was no longer hungry. My dad flipped. He immediately started screaming at me to eat every bite of the casserole, and that I wasn't leaving that spot until I did so. The coworker, bless his heart, tried to be a mediator by saying I didn't have to eat the food if I didn't like it, and that he has no problem making me a sandwich. My dad told him to shut the F up and threatened to sock him if he said another word. The next 5 minutes were me bawling my eyes out, slowly eating the casserole as my dad was screaming right next to my ear about how he's going to beat the SHT out of me if I didn't do what he says. 4th bite in, my stomach turned and I fell off the chair and threw up. I felt him grab me by the hair and drag me to the trailer, me wailing for him to not be mad at me. I will note that my parents were the type of parents to have a wooden paddle for spanking. But at the time it was only my mom who had the paddle, as she had enough restraint to make sure I didn't feel anything more than a slight sting to get the point across for why I was in trouble. And my dad proved he had zero restraint. As he yanked my pants off and swung the first blow, it was an agonizing strike that was so strong, I immediately stopped crying and felt numb, like he smacked all senses out of me. He swung the second time and I blacked out. The rest happened from the testimony of my grandma, as I was unconscious for 2 hours. While I was getting struck, my coworker called my mom in a panic, telling her to go to the campgrounds immediately, fearing for the well-being of myself. My mom and grandma immediately drove from their destination, a little over an hour-and-a-half drive to the campground. Unfortunately, my dad stormed out after striking me several times in blind fury, and threatened to beat the SHT out of the coworker and his kids if they ever mentioned what they witnessed. And the coworker fled. I don't know if my dad attempted to hurt the coworker and his kids, but considering how bloodthirsty he was, I wouldn't be surprised. My mom and grandma pulled up to see my dad sitting on a chair in front of the trailer, still fuming. He immediately told them both that I got what I deserved and I was making him look bad. They both went into the trailer to see me face down, pants off, the bottom of my back to the upper half of my thighs nearly black from bruising. My mom thought I was dead, and it took my grandma finding my pulse to find out that I was still alive. Just unconscious. My grandma floored it to the town's police station. There was no service for phones in that area at the time, and my mom stayed behind to make sure my dad didn't try to hurt me any further. That's when I regained consciousness and saw my grandma driving off. The thing is, my dad had no remorse for what he did, even saying that he couldn't care less if he killed me or not. He didn't even bother to check if I was still alive after continuously striking me until the cops were involved. He went inside and laid out a sob story about how he didn't mean to hurt me like that, and Dad always loves you. But, being the innocent kid I was, I believed him. But now I know it was just a lie to relieve himself of guilt. I wish I could say that he went to prison and I never had to deal with him again. But that wasn't the case. My mom did have plans to fully divorce him and hold all charges on him. But when she visited him in the county jail, he thoroughly convinced her that she couldn't afford the divorce, which my mom confirmed was true, and that my brother and I can't survive without him. Not to mention how she would be a social outcast for being a single mom. I don't know how true this was. But this was the very end of the 90s / just before 2000. He also laid it thick that even in the case she got her kids away from him, my dad will not rest until he kills her and takes my brother and me to where nobody will ever see us again. My mom tried to remain brave, but the threats worked, mostly due to how he was back to having no remorse over what he did to me. He was just upset he got caught. So my mom dropped the charges and she still lived with him until I was turning 11. However, the whole family was well aware of what he did, and they made it clear if he hurt me like that again or hurt my mom and brother like that, they will not hesitate to call the cops. The only thing that managed to do was make my dad much smarter about how to abuse us, sticking more to scaring the daylights out of us, and making us feel like accidents who nobody loves with his words than bruising us up with his fists. And when he did physically hurt my mom, brother and me, he did so in ways that could be covered up. As for how he is today, he's not as physically aggressive as he used to be. But he's become even more heartless and unfiltered in his words, and continues to believe that he does no wrong, and even has the right to hurt his kids, even when said kids are now adults. I have much more to say about the SHT this monster has done, and I might tell more of what he's done to me in my life. But for now, I just wanted to say how he assaulted me over a effing casserole, and how he managed to get away with it. Update: the 6 months of living with my monster of an entitled father after dropping out of college. Hello. Felt like telling more about my entitled father. More specifically, the 6 months of me living under his roof. Context: by this time I was 19 years old, so it would be about 10 years ago this day. Sadly dropped out of college within months of starting because of a variety of problems. Mostly from depression and stress that wasn't helped by my mom trying to tell me what to do. My mom and dad were long divorced by this point. I ended up moving to my dad's, who at the time had zero internet at the home. It was, in the words of my dad, punishment for me. Throwing away my one chance at being useful to this world. And I worked as a cashier at a restaurant chain in the nearby town my dad lived, and still lives out in the country. I would say things were rather uneventful. But he made sure that wouldn't be the case by being his usual self. Some of these things were brief and usual. Like him screaming at me for doing anything leisurely instead of working 24/7, like watching TV or going for a walk, like he does when he's off work. Or belittling me for trying to start drawing as a hobby, calling it a sissy thing. Here are some of the extreme things he did in those 6 months. One of the first things he did was shortly after I got my job. Things were going relatively well at the job despite one woman who found me just as pathetic as my dad did. Thank God she wasn't in any management positions, and that the manager and boss didn't like her behavior any more than I did, and some customers calling me the R word for making some errors. However, as par for the course of a part-time job, even back then I wasn't working much and wasn't getting that much money. I did have a talk with the boss about the hours and about how some days she'll send me home early if there was no business. But she said it was something she had to do. When I told my dad, he wasn't happy. He told me I had to make her give me more hours. I told her that if she said she can't, then she can't. He suddenly punched the wall right next to me, and had the glare that I've come to recognize as the "I'm going to hurt you if you make me angrier" look. So now I was scared for my well-being. He told me that now that he got me scared, I'm willing to do whatever he wants to keep myself safe. He then went on a rant about how real men get what they want by making promises to hurt and kill. You hurt and kill those who stand in your way. You hurt and kill those you don't like. You hurt and kill those who hold you back. If you don't do that, son, then you're not a man. You're a mistake. Although I didn't tell my manager what he did, I did tell her that he might get angry once he finds out she has to send me home early if business is dead. She simply said that if he does so or if he bruises me up, she'll call the cops, and she told him that directly. I was punished by being given sudden rent that costed most of my monthly amount of paychecks. Next, how I almost died from his negligence. He's one of those country folk who heats up the house with a furnace, those big cube-like iron things that are like a combination of a fireplace and a heater. Yeah, one of those. Well, on this day I had a night shift, and my dad was going to be out of the area until very late due to work. So my grandpa, his dad, offered to take me to work and back. I was enjoying the day to myself, doing what I wanted, watching whatever was on TV that caught my eye, drawing or at least attempting to draw some doodles, playing games, etc. By the time it got to the afternoon, I found I was oddly sleepy, so I decided to lie on the bed and close my eyes for an hour or two, just enough time to get a bit more energy in me for a potentially busy night. The local high school was having a game that night, and every game night was a busy night, but also so that I'll have plenty of time to get ready. I closed my eyes and was shaken awake by my grandpa, who looked absolutely relieved that I was conscious. In my blurry state, I heard an alarm going off, and he had me grab my work clothes and phone and took me to his house nearby to help me get my head clear before changing and going to work. What had happened was the furnace was not properly cared for, and there was a lot of gunk blocking the pipe leading outside, and the house was slowly but steadily being filled with carbon monoxide. It didn't take long to get better once I was able to breathe clean air, and although I was a bit woozy, I managed to work as much as I could. It wasn't a long shift, about 3 or 4 hours, and my grandma was the one who picked me up. She said my dad got home not too long ago, and they managed to clear the carbon monoxide of the home pretty quickly, and my grandpa was scolding the hell out of my dad. Sure enough, when I got home, my grandpa was pissed at my dad, and to my surprise, his sister was also there, scolding him as well. However, he was not once remorseful over what happened. He was annoyed they were getting on his case. Even when they tried to hammer in the fact that there was a chance I could have died, he simply scoffed. Well, he didn't. So stop making this a big deal. I did move out of his place very quickly, thankfully a few months after the carbon monoxide incident. My job unfortunately burned to the ground from an electrical fire, and I had the choice to either carpool to the next nearest location, 40 minutes away, or find a different job. I chose the latter, and my mom's mom offered to move me to her town, as there were far more job opportunities there than where I was living. Of course, my dad was not happy about that. He went to my account, to which I now know he did the usual entitled parent thing of having the account be a joint account, so he could get in without my permission, and took a huge chunk of money. His excuse was the rest of this year's rent. My grandma tried to find a legal way to get the money back, but since it was a joint account, we were told he technically didn't break any law, though I'm certain that the person who said that was wrong. And while I was packing up to move, my dad constantly told me how much of a disappointment I am, how I'm the reason my parents got a divorce, how I deserved all the abuse and bullying I got, and that nobody likes or tolerates me. My grandma did put him in his place, but that just escalated to where he told me he wishes I was a miscarriage. Although I regret not talking to my grandma about cutting him off, then I had no idea back then you could even do such a thing. That was the beginning of me slowly going low contact with him, only talking to him whenever I had to. Update. I'm having ankle surgery, and the only one who has no hope is my entitled dad, who thinks everything will go wrong if he's not calling the shots. Hello everyone. Now I have a very recent story to tell about my monster of an entitled dad, about how he has no hope for my upcoming surgery, and thinks that without him making the decisions it'll all go wrong. Context: in a couple of weeks I'll be having an ankle fusion. I've been having extreme pain in my ankle for quite a while, and in the last few years it has gotten worse and worse, and the orthopedic doctor has decided on an ankle fusion. The game plan is for me to stay a few nights in the hospital, and about 2 weeks at a physical rehabilitation facility to help me learn how to use a walker. I have a bleeding disorder, which requires some staying in the hospital, and they decided rehabilitation would be good since I live alone. As for the walker, they decided that was better for me than crutches, but I also have a wheelchair coming in too. Everyone's hopeful about the procedure. I'm hopeful, my mom's hopeful, my family's hopeful, my friends are hopeful, and my girlfriend is hopeful. The only one who isn't is my dad. The only reason I told him was because I thought it'd be better to just tell him instead of getting even angrier for keeping the surgery a secret. See? He's very anti-doctor. And in the last few years has been going deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole of alternative medicine. During the pandemic, he wanted to sign me up for this pyramid scheme involving pine needle tea to give me COVID immunity and to cure me of my autism. And not too long ago he sent a video from an alternative medicine lady who was talking about how no processed sugar and no gluten will cure you of autism. He's been very persistent that I'll be a better person for the world overall if my autism is cured, and how mental illnesses are not real but fabricated by doctors to kill you to take your money. Just a bunch of bullshit. And now he's spouting off about how ankle fusion will not work. He started rambling about how, with the limited mobility, I won't be able to exercise and will therefore become fatter and less desirable to everyone. I do have a weight problem as well as internalized fat phobia thanks to him. I told him how the doctors will plan to give me modified shoes to help me walk. But then he went off about how that'll break my ankle. I told him I'll have physical therapy to help me use a walker on one foot, while a non-weight bearing. And then after the healing, they'll do more physical therapy to help me walk normally again. And how I'll have a wheelchair to help me get around if I need to go out. He snapped about how I'm not listening to him. And that it's proof that I need family, more specifically him in my life. He demanded that my mom either have me stay with her for the entire recovery process, or that I stay with him for the entire recovery process. I stood my ground and told him that's not necessary, that we already have a plan, and that I trust these doctors. That made him really mad, with him yelling if I trust strangers more than family. I firmly told him that is not what I meant. And that just because he's not confident in the game plan, doesn't mean he has to be doom and gloom about it. Surprisingly, that made him realize that he wasn't going to get to me. And he huffed that if I want to try then fine. But if something goes wrong, I'm going to regret not taking his help. This may not have been as bad as what he did in the past. But I felt like it was worth sharing. Update. So my appointment is the morning after tomorrow. I've been getting everything ready for the surgery and rehab. And while I'm scared, I'm still confident that things will go smoothly. Well, my mom called me this morning to tell me that my entitled dad talked with her. He was planning on driving up 12 to 14 hours to get me, and have me stay with him for the entirety of my recovery. But he couldn't drive up due to being unable to get days off from his job, and was wanting my mom to drive me down for him. She managed to get him off my back by fully telling him that I have more physical therapy appointments afterwards, that she has full confidence in the recovery plan, and that he needs to step back and let things go at my pace and not his. He also complained about having me move down to my birth state because he needs family. He can't do anything on his own. And she told him off that I've been doing much better than anyone could have predicted in the almost 6 years of living independently in my city. He didn't believe it. But he knew he wasn't going to convince her to side with him, which is surprising. The main reason I posted this is because he was actually planning that. Planning to come up and take me to his place, without even consulting me about it. I'm sadly not surprised that he was going to try that. Horrified, yes, but not surprised. I'm just relieved my mom fully stood by my side and managed to get him to back off. I doubt it'll be for long, and that he'll try to call and be back on his bullshit. But even in the off chance he actually does drive up to try something, I'm now mentally prepared to get the cops on speed dial, should the worst outcomes happen, that is, him trying to take me by force or trying to break into my apartment. Update. Talked with the manager of my apartment building about what happened. She's putting him on a list to make sure he can't get into the building, and that the cops will be called if he comes around to make trouble. We'll do the same thing with the doctors and rehab team tomorrow. Update 2. Surgery went well and I've been relaxing in the room for about 6 to 7 hours. Gave Dad the information diet, and told him as little as possible when he called despite how tired I am when my mom told him to text me while I'm at the hospital. Well, even after being told twice that his idea of having me stay with him for recovery was not going to happen, he brought that up again. I fully told him that it is not necessary, and he jokingly said he gives options and I shoot them down. Well, the joke's on him. He's on the no-visit list. I highly doubt he can find the time to come up. But I like to see him try. Second story. My dad had been obsessed with eating illegal meat, even our pets, and it ruined his life and our family. So my dad has always been a kind of strange guy, but I never really noticed. I was used to it and that's just who he is. He isn't mean but doesn't talk much, is very busy with work, doesn't seem to be interested in anyone's life, that kind of thing. When I was a kid, gradually our relatives stopped visiting. My dad wasn't in contact with his family, but my mom's used to be around a lot. Then they stopped. I remember hearing my mom fighting with her parents a couple of times. I gathered they didn't like my dad. I haven't seen my cousins in years. We used to be close as kids. I was never one for social media. But recently I reactivated my Facebook and decided to look up some of my relatives on a whim. I messaged my cousin I was closest to, 18F. Also my aunt, her mom, 40F. My cousin didn't seem to know why we hadn't seen each other. But my aunt said I should ask my mom. It wasn't the sort of thing I should hear from her, my aunt. Mind you, I'd asked my mom before a few times. She always said they were too busy to visit. I was really confused and we ended up having a long conversation yesterday. I had to insist on a real answer. Now I am horrified at what I found out. Her family is freaked out by my dad because a few years ago when they came for dinner, this was a bunch of people, not just my aunt and cousin. They found out what he'd said was beef was actually kangaroo meat. My mom had specifically gone out of her way to make the meal herself because she knew my dad had done this before. So she banned him from cooking. But he secretly swapped the meats at some point when she wasn't in the kitchen. She admitted to her family he was constantly doing this to us. Yeah, now I know I've eaten a ton of gross SHT he'd said was beef or chicken. And whenever I didn't like something, it was probably because it wasn't what he said. She told me that he's been obsessed with trying exotic meats for years. Now looking back, I remember times I saw weird unlabeled meat packages in the basement freezer. I just never thought to inspect it. She said he has spent thousands and thousands of dollars in getting them. They are rare and cost a lot, plus travel costs, and paying off his contacts who pass information about where he can find whatever he's looking for. It's driven my parents to the verge of financial ruin multiple times. My mom also said they've nearly divorced a few times. I used to hear them fighting sometimes as a kid. Now I guess I know why. You're probably thinking he just has adventurous tastes and this can't be that bad. So I'll give the full picture of everything she told me. Some of the things he's had are weird to standard Americans. But I realize might not be that weird in other places, the kangaroo and horse, for example, wolf, camel, and shark fin soup. Some is questionable, I guess. Such as something called orderland bunting, look it up, and seafood eaten while still alive. Then some of it is straight up illegal. Like she said, he once killed and ate a bald eagle. He hunts normal game, which I knew, but also protected species. He's obtained bushmeat, meat from African wildlife, that's illegally imported here. This includes stuff like rats, various monkeys, chimpanzees, apes and gorillas, pangolins, porcupines, civets and giraffes. From what my mom knows, he bought these from some markets in Nick that sold them in immigrant communities. It became even worse with other exotic animals. He has gone so far as to travel to other countries specifically to hunt, get meat from particular animals. These have included zebras, cheetahs, elephants, hippos, Bengal tigers, and endangered rhinos in places in Southeast Asia and Africa. He went somewhere in the Caribbean to hunt and eat dolphin. Brazil for anaconda. My mom says that a trip he's going on next month to China is specifically to try to find a way of eating Chinese salamander and panda meat. These are both very endangered species. It's seriously illegal there to kill pandas. That's not something Chinese people actually eat. But he's determined to do it. And he's been like that about some of the other ones I mentioned that are also rare or under protected status. Like some types of gorillas and orangutans. Who hears of an endangered animal and thinks, aha, I want to eat that. WTF? Oh, and he also wants to go to the Antarctic to hunt penguins and whatever else is there before the ice melts. He's already been to the Arctic and eaten stuff there apparently. My mom has to snoop on his laptop to keep an eye on what he's doing since he stopped talking about it. He knows she doesn't approve, but she can't do anything. They just pretend it's not happening. And she reads his emails with contacts whenever he mentions needing to go on a trip for work. She says it sounds like these people are involved in foreign animal trade networks. He's very secretive. She has to deliberately wait for a minute. He's in the bathroom with the computer logged in. She has been terrified for years that any day he's going to get arrested. My mom and younger siblings rely on my dad's salary. My mom is disabled with a chronic illness and cannot work. So they would only have disability checks to get by on. There was more she didn't even tell me because it wasn't appropriate. And she refused when I said I could handle it. So I can only imagine what else he's done. I don't know what to do. My family is on the brink of falling apart and I never knew. I will never look at my dad the same again. This is really disgusting to me. My mom can't divorce him because they rely on him. She won't talk to her family about it because they just tell her to divorce. I know she's very anxious. But I feel like I've almost lost respect for her because she knew the whole time and never at least warned me. I'm also pretty sure she has lied to me, saying we never had a cat when I was little. Except I remember it and don't remember what happened to it. Which now I'm sick thinking maybe my dad did something. My mom insisted I was thinking of someone else's cat. But there is a photo of me as a little girl with that cat on my bed. I'm in college on the other side of the country and only home for a few more days. My mom made me promise to never say a word to my dad. He'd kill me. This is all so effed up to me. I'm really worried about them and what they'll do if he's caught. Also, what the F is wrong with him? What can I do? Should I confront him or try to convince my mom to leave? Get her family involved? It's like disarming a bomb. I don't want to do anything that would just blow everything up. But I cannot imagine him just getting to continue doing whatever he wants. TLDR. My dad has secretly been pursuing chances to eat meat from endangered animal species whenever he can. He's totally out of control to the point of breaking the law to get it. Throughout my childhood he snuck it into food he made us, pretending it was something normal like beef, pork, or chicken. My mom is too scared to leave him or do anything. Has anyone ever heard of something like this? What are my options? Relevant comments. Womp womp rats. Your dad seems mentally ill. Not because of the weird meat but because of the effed up behavior around it. There are people who basically collect exotic meats or other foods by eating them the same way others collect countries by visiting them. It can be an expensive pursuit. But he's pursuing it more like an addiction than a hobby, to the point of self-destruction. And the part where he tries to make the family complicit by sneaking rat meat into your burgers, that's a straight-up fetish. I'm going to guess getting him into psychotherapy is probably a no-go. But he needs it. That's a good point that it could just be a thing about novel experiences. But the illegal parts are what get to me. It's not illegal to travel or try a bunch of foods in restaurants. He's eating and sometimes killing species he's not supposed to, and buying some of the meat on a black market or bringing it in himself. That part is really crazy to me. And yeah, I'm seriously sickened the thought of what I might have eaten because of him. I want to help my mom. But I also hate that she let this go on. I feel like I can't trust either of them now. She didn't mention anything about therapy. I couldn't bring it up without him knowing I know. And my mom said I can't do that. She implied he could become violent. I don't know exactly. But it freaked me out. Delete it. From the first paragraph, is he autistic? And is this his obsession? Or is he more psychopathic? That is, lacking empathy and not giving a SHT about anyone. Not autistic. At least there's no reason to think so. Psychopath. Well, after finding out all of this I couldn't say. Update about my dad's exotic meats obsession. Well, SHT's really FED now. A couple of days after I posted I went back to school and a few days after that my mom called me. She'd woken up to him gone, and an email saying he had to leave for China earlier than expected, citing some issue at his company. That's around when the virus was breaking out. Yeah, he took off as soon as he got word something was happening in case it was going to prevent his trip, my mom thinks. But it gets worse because apparently with increased security, there was something that looked suspicious and he was detained last week. In China during this outbreak. My mom had federal agents come to interview her. That was Friday. They had a warrant to search the apartment, but didn't take anything because he brought all his electronics with him. She says she was told they have reason to believe he's involved in an international animal trafficking and poaching ring. She hasn't had any contact with him, yet because whoever's holding him isn't granting it. We don't even know exactly where he is, if it was near Wuhan or in a prison or what. She was just told she needed to cooperate, and his safety was being handled. Obviously there's probably a lot more than they're saying because it's a serious crime, and I imagine diplomatic relations are tense at this moment. But honestly, he put himself there. The Chinese authorities have every reason to arrest him. My mom has shared what she knows with the American agents, some of the stuff I said in my last post. I told her to get a lawyer. Because who knows if even knowing about that stuff and not reporting it is a crime too. My dad deserves this, but my mom had no part in what he was doing. If something happens to her, I don't know what's going to happen with my siblings. I'm really effing scared for my family and furious with my dad for doing this to us. Plus, Trump's travel ban means it's going to be way more difficult to work everything out. So he could be sitting there waiting for trial for a long time. Even if they flew him back for trial, he'll be in quarantine for 2 weeks. I feel like I'm watching my family's life collapse in slow motion. I'm seriously considering taking a leave this semester and going home to try to help my mom. She's practically having a mental break. She decided not to tell my siblings the real reason Dad is gone. So their imaginations are running wild. I've reached out to my aunt again, but she hasn't seen the message yet. I don't really trust my mom to manage finding a good lawyer and dealing with this and taking care of my siblings at the same time. On top of it, her chronic illness has flared up from the stress.